Hey guys, Hank here. While I was doing my research for different topics, I came across this paper from the 90s offering proof of permanent penile enlargement. And quite honestly, I was prepared to rip it to shreds, but it actually surprised me, and I think it might surprise you too. So stay tuned and let's dissect it. So as I mentioned above, this paper is called Permanent Non-Surgical Elongation of the Adult Penis, and it was published in 1995 in actually a decent journal, the Journal of Neurological and Orthopedic Medicine and Surgery. Basically what they did in a nutshell is they used a combination of both a stretching massage technique and pumping, and it led to an increase in size of 0.7 inches in length and 0.5 inches in circumference or girth. And so the routine basically came from a book called The Penis by Brian Richards, and if I can find a screenshot of it, I'll put it up here, but I don't know if one exists actually. And what happened is they employed this technique in 28 males, and it was published in a magazine article, and it showed that there was basically an average increase in length by about 1 inch. This paper wanted to do was actually replicate prior data, which is important because, I mean, honestly, that's a validation right there. And so how they performed this is they actually looked in basically a sex magazine and looked at the advertisements for different penis pumps, and they ordered 8 different models, and they chose the one that they said produced enough engorgement that it might be capable of stretching the penis, which I think is an important part because you have to actually have enough stress to get that growth stimulus, which is what I talked about in my prior videos on pumping. If you haven't seen those, I'll put up some screenshots here, but just click on my name and you can find them. And so they used initially 10 men between the age of 23 and 57. And of those 10 men, 3 said, that's too much work, I'm dropping out. So the attrition rate was about 30%, but it's kind of what I would expect for a PE study. It's just like diet and exercise. Not everybody's cut out for it. It's too much work, so they quit. And so what they did was a vigorous stretching massage for 10 minutes, followed by the vacuum pump for 30 minutes. But they started with 2 to 3 minutes and built up slowly for 30 minutes. They described the pump diameter, which was about 2.5 inches. And they also described some, to me, very validating things like the amount of edema that built up after about 20 minutes of pumping and how that edema led to them essentially packing the tube and other very detailed things that led me to believe that, this study was actually performed the way that they said it was. The other important method is that they actually used both stretch flaccid length, which was actually measured by an observer, and they reported the patient's own erect measurements, which in this study they said correlated almost 100%. In the results, I'll put up the table here where you can kind of see everything that results, but in a nutshell, once again, it was 0.7 inches in length and 0.5 inches in girth, meaning an average erect volume increase of 37%. Imagine right now if your dick was 37% bigger. That's a massive increase. All the patients reported an increase in libido and sexual arousal, and they actually described this as being permanent results because they had a subject that maintained his gain 9 years later, as well as 2 other subjects that several years later continued to have those same results. Overall, pretty good study, okay? And I'll go into that a little bit. So what are some of the problems? Well, number one, it's outdated, okay? There's actually some claims in this study that are like borderline racist because there's this trope that like black men have much larger penises. And so in one of the studies, they claimed that there was a measured participant that had a penis length of 16 inches. 1-6, okay? 16 inches. And that on average, the black males are about 0.3 inches bigger than the white counterparts, which I'm gonna have another whole video on size and race and how they intertwine. But if you're gonna claim that part of the data that you use to build your study is from a guy who had a 16-inch penis, your credibility is shot right there. In the participants, they don't mention things such as comorbidities like smoking, baseline erectile dysfunction, diabetes, and how that could play into it, because they do mention that pumping improves erectile quality in this study and how it's been used to cure impotence, but they make no mention of how erectile quality could factor in the study. They don't mention any of the negative side effects. They don't specify whether they used bone press measurements or non-bone pressed. Based on the measurements, I'm assuming they have to be bone pressed because it's like, well over 6 inches is the average in some cases. Of course, this is a small study. We're talking about 7 patients. However, this was almost a validation study based on the prior article, which used 28 participants. These people used 7 participants and had essentially the same results. And of course, in all of these studies, I would love to see some kind of scientifically, tastefully done, before and after measurements with rulers in place showing clearly that, yeah, the results are what we say they are. And so what are my thoughts about this paper? Well, as you can probably tell, I was actually surprised with how much I like this paper. I was fully prepared to actually torch this paper, but it's actually pretty legit. And I've already mentioned several of the reasons, but one of the reasons why I like it so much is my own confirmation bias, which is a real thing. Look up confirmation bias. But basically what I preach in my method of enlargement is basically a combination of stretching and pumping on a regular basis is all you need to get very pronounced results. I have published my results. I've grown over, 1.3 inches in length and, over right at about 0.8 inches in girth, okay? And the combination of what I did is essentially what they did in this paper. I do manual stretches for about 20 minutes, followed by pumping for about 20 minutes as well. That's pretty much it. This showed that the methods that I'm using, which I think are very simple and overall very cheap and effective, are effective. They didn't promote any products. So this is not like this paper was sponsored by, Super Pump. It was just, they didn't even list the name of the paper. So there was no promotional bias and there was really no financial incentive to publish this study. The incentive was just to show literally in the discussion that, guys, there are ways, non-surgical ways to enlarge your penis that you should think about doing before you consider any type of surgery. They had observed reproducible measurements done by scientists on this paper. So the measurements were legit, not just like the other paper I'm talking about where they just submit digital photos, which can be easily manipulated just by angling. When once again, they described things like the edema process and like the swelling and packing the tube and how that affected things, and even different things like ecchymosis, which can occur during the pumping process, that really legitimized that the scientists were actually observing the patient's pumping, okay? Or at least observing in some regard. This paper shows that pumping can be effective for both length and girth, which I believe it can be effective for both, though I do think most of the time it's more effective in girth. And it just, not to belabor the point, but there's always this, there's no proof that penis enlargement works. This is a paper from the 90s that showed that, yeah, you can enlarge your penis. And it published in a peer-reviewed journal, but yet all the doctors and all the people are like, nope, you can't enlarge your penis. It's not possible. And it's like, this is a medical journal, peer-reviewed, which showed that it is possible. Like, why do we keep saying this? But anyways, the last thing is that there was only 7 guys that were in this study, but none of them had any kind of meaningful adverse effects, at least none that were published. And so you can do this and you can do it safely. And so this leads to basically like, what is my routine? Well, I'm gonna release a full video soon. I'm gonna make it basically a safe for work version. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to do that. But in my routine, what I recommend when anybody asks what I do is basically manual stretches for about 20 to 30 minutes per day. So what is a manual stretch? Well, you take one hand, put it at the base, one hand, put it towards the end, not on the head, and you basically apply constant tension, okay? And you can do that in different directions and whatnot, and we can go over that. But you basically pull and hold is a static stretch. And then after you've done that routine, you just combine it with pumping. Maybe take 1, maybe 2 days off a week if you need to. That's it, okay? And so, I think that this is a tried and true method, and I'm validated by this study from the 90s. It's kind of crazy. So anyways, guys, it is possible to enlarge your manhood. It just is. If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. Click off the video, but it is. And there's other studies like this, which I've talked about in other videos, which you can check out. I do think if you're going to engage in any sort of kind of enlargement activities, you do need to have a supplement that's going to increase your blood flow, like citrulline. If you haven't seen my videos on increasing blood flow, videos on citrulline and videos on PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra and how that can increase safety, please check. If you need any kind of injury support, or I wouldn't say coaching just because I don't consider myself a coach, or if you just want to support me in my mission, check me out at on my patreon.kink. And until the next one, guys, peace.